Life Science Week 3, Genetics and Heredity, How We Are What We Are. I'm a tongue-rolling, free earlobed, hitchhiker's thumbed, freckled XY. So a double X is a female and an X and a Y is a male. Those are chromosomes. Yeah, well, I'm a widow's peak dimple-chinned attached earlobed XX with a mid-digital hair and non-pigmented irises. So irises are part of your eye. Hi, sis. Hey, big bro. The brother and sister are naming just a few of the traits they inherited from their parents. Traits are characteristics like brown hair, freckles, and dimples. The two have the same father and mother, and they share some of the same traits, yet they're different from another in many ways. Perhaps they look like members of the same family, but many brothers and sisters hardly look alike at all. Look around your classroom. You probably see a lot of differences among your classmates. Yet you and all other humans share nearly all the same material that makes you who you are. So why don't we all look alike? Many years ago, a monk named Gregor Mendel, that's an important person to know in history and science, began to solve the mystery of genetics and heredity. Genetics is the study of how traits are inherited. Heredity is passing down the traits from a parent to its offspring. From his experiments with pea plants, Mendel learned that there must be two factors for each trait, and one of those two factors comes from each parent. Today we know these factors by another name, genes. So since the mom is a double X, a mom can only give her child an X, so the gender of the baby is determined by the dad, who is an XY. He can either give an X chromosome or a Y. And if he gives an X to that first X, it's a girl. If he gives a Y to that female's first X, then it's a boy. So fun science fact for you. Genes are segments of DNA that hold the instruction for the traits of an organism. There are many, many, many vocab terms on the front page here if you haven't noticed, so I would kind of pause and highlight as needed. They might tell your cells to make proteins that will cause your hair to be curly or to instruct your skin cells to produce freckles. Genes come from parents who got their genes from their parents. The combination of these genes is random and unpredictable, so you did not inherit the exact same genes as your brother or sister unless you're an identical twin. So fun fact, identical twins have the exact same genes, but they don't have the same fingerprints because those are formed in the womb from like movement and like stress in the womb and stuff. So they do have different fingerprints. Continued on the back. You began as a zygote, a fertilized egg cell that contained the 20,000 or so genes in your body. These genes are arranged on chromosomes, structures made of DNA. You inherit one set of 23 chromosomes from your mother and another 23 from your father. So that gives us a total of 46 chromosomes. And fun fact about chromosomes, people with Down syndrome have 47 chromosomes, so they get an extra chromosome. Most of those chromosomes carry genes that give you your characteristics, but one pair determines your gender. Mothers contribute what's called an X chromosome. Fathers contribute an X or Y. A zygote with two X chromosomes will develop into a female. A zygote with the XY chromosome pair will develop into a male. Sorry, I sometimes forget what they actually include in here, so there's a little review for you. In this issue, we will look at how these genes help determine your physical traits and how others are distinct from you. We will also examine how genes are passed on to the next generation. STEM, living with diabetes. There's also a brain pop on diabetes if you're interested in learning more. What does famous pop singer Nick Jonas have in common with more than 18 million Americans? The answer is clear in the title. Diabetes. In 2005, Nick Jonas lost 15 pounds in 2 weeks, drank water constantly, and was not acting the way he usually did. After going to the doctor, he was told he had type 1 diabetes. About 8% of the population, more than 23 million children and adults, have diabetes. So what is it? Well, there are really two types, although both have the same basic problem. The people with this disease have too much sugar, also known as glucose, in their blood. The first, called juvenile diabetes, got its name because children seem to get it more often. It's now called type 1 diabetes. This kind occurs when the immune system attacks the cells that make insulin. Without insulin, you get diabetes because your body can't process glucose or sugar. The other kind is called type 2 diabetes. With this kind, your body doesn't make enough insulin or your body can't use it correctly. So diabetes all boils down to sugar and insulin. Type 2 diabetes is usually found in people who are overweight. This type is increasingly occurring in children since so many more children have become obese. Signs of diabetes include being extremely thirsty, having to go to the bathroom a lot, and losing weight quickly. Some people even have blurry vision or are extremely tired. There's no cure for diabetes, so people who have it must control it by eating right and using medicine and exercising. Genetics and heredity. Look in the mirror. Do you look more like your mom or your dad? Maybe you look like a little of each of them. That's because you inherited half of your genes from each of your parents. Brothers and sisters do not look exactly alike because the parents' genes recombine in a unique way to form an individual that's different from any other. So how does this happen? Reproduction and heredity. The process of making more of one's own kind is known as reproduction. All species of living things undergo this process. Reproduction is necessary for the survival of the species. During sexual reproduction, a new organism receives genetic material from both parents. First, a process called meiosis occurs. Meiosis is an important science word. This process produces special sex cells, sperm, and eggs. These cells have only half of the chromosomes needed for a complete human being. When fertilization occurs, the sperm enters the egg, resulting in a fertilized egg that is a complete set of 23 pairs of chromosomes. So they're paired up, that makes 46 total, or an extra. So an extra, like a lack of a chromosome or an extra chromosome, may be the difference for things like one of them is Down syndrome. And there's many others too. The mother has contributed half of the DNA of the offspring, and the father has contributed the other half. You may wonder why brothers and sisters are not exact replicas of one another if they share DNA from the same mother and father. Let's do the math. During meiosis, the 23 pairs of chromosomes make copies of themselves. These chromosomes can combine in more than 8 million different ways. Each combination is equally likely to be passed on to the offspring. Each mother and father contributes the same number of possibilities. You are just one of the trillions of possibilities that your parents could have produced. It's no wonder there's no one else in the world just like you. So fun fact about eggs and identical twins and stuff. If you have fraternal twins who are twins that don't share the same DNA, but they happen to be born at the same time, oh gosh, I forgot where I was going with that. That's kind of embarrassing. Well, another fun fact popped in my head. A male and a female twins, such as the Spigler twins that we know, are not identical because they have to be the same gender to be identical because, this is what I'm going to say, if you are identical twins and have the same DNA, you were one egg cell, and then after fertilization, that egg cell split, and instead of like being chopped in half, if you will, instead of being one, now it split, and now you have two of the exact same thing. So it's crazy, crazy cool. Whereas fraternal twins were two separate like egg cells to begin with. So science facts for you. Genes. Each chromosome contains thousands of genes. These genes determine the traits of an organism. Genes determine the color of a dog's fur, the length of a lion's teeth, the shape of a turtle's shell, and the number of petals on a flower. Genes are the instructions that control the color of your eyes, how tall you'll be, the length of your nose, and even to some degree how easily you'll catch a cold. How do you receive the genes that make you unique? Traits. Your set of genes determines your traits or characteristics. So traits and characteristics are kind of interchangeable words. Genes occur in pairs. Each gene in a pair is called an allele. So if you haven't highlighted things about genes yet, you should. An allele is going to pop up as well. A dominant allele or a dominant trait is one that appears as an observable trait, so one that you can see. This trait is known as a phenotype. Pheno is Greek, that means to show. The set of alleles that determine the trait is the genotype. The allele that does not appear as a trait is a recessive allele. So recessive traits are traits you can't see. You inherited one allele from each parent. Say the dominant form of the trait for hair texture is curly hair, and the recessive form is straight hair. If you inherited two dominant alleles, you have curly hair. If you inherited two recessive genes, so the ones that aren't showing in your parents, you have straight hair, because both of those traits in them that aren't showing went to you. But what if you inherited two different alleles? The dominant one is the one that takes over. Oopsie. It hides the effect of the recessive allele, so you have curly hair. But if you have that recessive trait in you, you might pass that on to your child, even if it's not visible on you. Not all human traits are determined by just two alleles. Some traits are caused by a combination of several genes, and some traits are influenced by your environment, experiences, and upbringing. An international group of scientists worked for years to create a complete map of the human genome. This cooperation was called the Human Genome Project and was successfully completed in 2001. The Human Genome Project found that humans have in common over 99% of all our genes. The differences in the remaining 1% is enough to make us each unique. That is crazy. You have the same exact genes for making red blood cells as your teacher and your classmates. These genes are sometimes called workhorse genes. There are also many genes that don't seem to do anything. Scientists are still trying to learn what the purpose of the junk DNA serves. Science and tools using a Punnett Square. So Punnett Square is kind of like a science factor puzzle in a way. A Punnett Square is a table that can be used to predict the traits of an offspring will have based on the traits the parents have. On the Punnett Square below, the alleles contributed by the male are shown on the top, and the alleles contributed by the female are on the left. The square shows all the possibilities of the allele pairs on the offspring. In pea plants, the tall, capital T, is the dominant height, and the small t is the recessive height. As the Punnett Square shows, if a male and female each contribute a dominant allele, so they're your two, like capital T dominants, the plant's going to be tall. Here, your dominant and like short, small t or short trait go together. The dominant one takes over. Here, again, if you have the big T here and a little t there, it's going to be tall, even though it's hanging on to that short gene. And if you get the small t and the small t together, that plant is going to be short because those are the combinations. Off to the back. The offspring will be a tall plant. If you contribute the recessive allele, the offspring will be short. If one dominant and one recessive are contributed, the dominant will hide the effect of the recessive and the plant will be tall. If these parent plants reproduce, then on average there would be 3 tall plants for every short plant. Technology and science. The science of mutants. Run for your life! The mutants are coming! Perhaps you've seen movies that show mutants with crazy powers or monsters bent on the destruction of civilization. Maybe these mutants were exposed to radioactive waste and caused the transformation. Are these ideas based on real science? Well, yes and no. A mutant is an individual, any organism, not just humans, that has a trait not found in the parent. The trait is caused when a gene is not correctly copied from the parent. Mutations can happen randomly, but they can be caused by radioactivity and other factors like UV light and lead. UV stands for ultraviolet. Usually a mutation causes the death of a cell or doesn't affect the organism at all, but sometimes the mutation can give the organism an advantage. For example, a mutation that gives an animal white fur would be a benefit to the animal in snowy weather. The organism might survive more easily to pass on the gene to its young. Mutations have actually led to the evolution of new species. But can a mutation give you the ability to shoot energy beams from your eyes? To fly or to read minds? No, mutations do not result in traits that are not possible under the laws of nature. This week's question: why do identical twins look alike? So we've kind of already gone over that. Sorry guys, like I said, when I think of things, I love sharing it with you, and sometimes it's actually in our content. So here we go. Identical twins look alike because they share the same genetic code, or DNA. They both began life in the womb as a single fertilized egg. The egg begins to grow normally into a single embryo as cells repeatedly divide, but for some unknown reasons, the embryo splits into 2. The embryos continue to develop normally into babies. Because their genetic blueprint is established before they split, the twins will have the same phenotypes or observable traits. Identical twins will grow to have some differences. Experiences and environmental factors can turn genes on or off. This causes identical twins to become more and more different as they get older. Fraternal twins do not look any more alike than any brothers or sisters. They develop when 2 eggs are fertilized. Each egg and each sperm have the unique genetic combination, so the babies will be genetically different, just like other siblings. Fun fact, Jason's mom is actually an identical twin, so it's kind of cool. And I have to pay super close attention to be able to tell them apart, but it's doable. Just have to pay attention and get to know people. In the spotlight, Gregor Mendel. Pea plants may not be that exciting, but to German monk Gregor Mendel, they were a new way to study science. For 10 years, Mendel carefully performed experiments on his pea plants. He wanted to learn whether or not it was possible to predict the result of crossbreeding. In his first test, Mendel crossed tall pea plants with short and planted the seeds. All of the offspring plants were tall. In his second test, however, several short plants appeared. Mendel continued to conduct many controlled experiments and came to learn that each parent contributes a single gene for each trait. He also learned that fertilization is random, so the appearance of traits follows the laws of probability. Mendel's tests were groundbreaking, but largely ignored. So like many scientists we've talked about, people at the time were like, okay, whatever, you're crazy, right? But then they found out, oh, you were onto something. So these poor scientists, goodness gracious. His work was rediscovered years after his death and has since had a major influence over modern genetics. Anyone who studies genetics or heredity knows his notational system, known as the Mendelian laws of inheritance, to this day. So go ahead and make a difference in the world and use some science.